Welcome, geeks, to another episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm Dave McCarter. I'm really glad you're here. We've been off for a couple weeks, so I'm glad you're back. Hi to everybody who's watching live right now. We got a great show for you today. We have Mark Brown from Microsoft, he's the principal program manager for Cosmos DB. So we're going to be talking about geeking out about all Cosmos DB stuff today. And if you haven't looked at Cosmos DB, stay on the show and check it out some more. I really like it, and I hope you will too if you haven't used it yet after the show. So I hope everybody's doing good. California has been hammered with crappy weather the last couple of weeks, so it looks like the storms are finally gone. The cold is still here, unfortunately, but hopefully that will get better. I hope things are okay where you live. I know the rest of the country's been really hit hard with a lot of the weather we've been having since Christmas, and so I hope everybody's doing okay. I did see a picture this morning from one of my friends in Arizona who got his truck got snuck in snow in Arizona. It reminded me of one time when I was in Flagstaff, Arizona, visiting family, where I got stuck in the snow and some guy came down a hill and hit me, and it was a big mess. So I'm glad I live in San Diego where we don't have messes like that. That's for sure. This is show number 72. I'm glad you're here. And every time I say the show number now, I'm wondering when we're going to get to 100. What do you think, Simon? And also, because Mark is here, make sure you start asking your questions about Cosmos DB or anything you want, really, so we can get those answered for you on the show. Okay, so let's get going. I want to promote, of course, my brand new book, Rock Your Code and App Performance for Microsoft.NET is out. This is actually a preview copy. I don't even have a real copy yet, so this is the proof copy, actually. That I'm thinking I might auction off and raise some money for the Voice of Slum, who you all know I raise money for. So you can get my book anywhere. You can get a printed Amazon book, and so I hope you go pick it up. I worked super hard on this book most of last year, actually, and the cool thing that I've realized with the book is, we put out books so we can help people and maybe make a little bit of money, because tech books don't really sell too much anymore. But for this book, I really learned a lot about .NET performance and all the different weird ways I was benchmarking performance in .NET 6 and .NET 7. So if I learned a lot for the book, then I hope and I know you will learn a lot too, to make your code as performant as possible, because we all need to really worry about this, especially with the cloud, because that's how things are charged, basically how long it's being performed on the cloud. That's what you get charged for the most part. So I hope you pick it up to make it easy to make things as fast as possible in your code for you. All right. Oh, I forgot to mention, it's $10 off this month. The price is going to go up on February 1st. So if you want to save $10, go pick up a copy now before the price goes up. Also, I'm just about to release the quarterly release of Spargin.net. No, that's the website, sorry, of Spargin. Spargin, as you all know, is my open source software that I've been writing since .NET 2, basically. And I just was doing some final benchmarking on it last night. And so it's pretty much ready to go. I'll also have an article coming out on CSharpCorner when it comes out to show you all the new cool things that I've implemented into the open source software, including some of the things I learned from my book. So one of the things I've been doing since I finished my book back in December is I've been trying to take a lot of the things I've learned in my book and apply them to Spargin. So you just use Spargin and it'll be doing the fastest way possible. So you don't have to worry about it. So I hope you go pick it up, check it out. I have a new article on CSharpCorner based on my new book. I decided to write an article about the fastest way to loop over an array in Microsoft.NET. For my book, one of the things I concentrated on for this release is that I found every way you can loop through a collection in .NET, and I did that against every collection, every major collection in the .NET framework, and that's what comprised. That's why I had over 65, 100 benchmark tests for this version of the book, is because of those dang collections. And so, anyway, the first article from the new book I decided was on arrays. And so you'll see I'm going to present a couple different ways of looping through an array. There's lots of different ways to do it in .NET now, but which one is more performant? And the answer isn't super easy when you read the article, because when you're looping in an array with the record type in it, that actually performs differently than if you're looping through an array with a reference or a value type in it. So I hope you check out the article and, of course, my book too. Okay. With that, I want to bring on Mark Brown. Mark has been at Microsoft for over 20 years. We were just talking about this before the show. He currently works on Cosmos DB team and oversees all their developer outreach and community activities. So welcome, Mark.
Hey, Dave, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You touched on a bunch of things that kind of also intersect with my life. Like, I think you remember, like, I live about an hour north of you, up in Orange County, and went through.
Oh, that's right. You moved down here. I
yeah,
keep forgetting
right.
that.
Yeah. Actually, long story short, I'm moving back to Seattle this year. But went through all that weather and those crazy storms. I learned about a place that I'd never heard of before, even when I used to live down here back before Microsoft. There's a place called Cordis Bank, which is about 47 miles west of San Clemente Island, which is one of the Channel Islands, just directly off the coast from where you and I live.
Right.
Apparently, that place is a seamount, comes very close to the surface, and during good times of the year when there are storms coming through, particularly when you got a couple of bomb cyclones running through the area, can generate waves of 70, 80, 90, 100 feet high.
Wow.
Wow. And I read about this in a local online paper, and now I want to go check this out. It's quite a ways out there. I mean, it's 47 miles. It's 100 miles off the coast. So you're looking at like a 10-hour boat ride to get out there. But man, it sounds amazing.
Another thing, we had waves anywhere close to that big. That's one thing whenever I drive by or walk by a surfing contest in California, I go, really? In California?
Yeah,
our waves here are pretty lame.
Like 6 feet standing up basically is what you're going to get. It's a lot of like old man beach, basically. The little rollers, right? Even like Salt Creek. I mean, you can get some good waves, and you get the swells coming in the right direction. The Wedge and other places can get some, and Salt Creek, other places can get some good waves. Anyway, the other thing that you said was Flagstaff. I went to university in Flagstaff, and
my brother did too.
I'm quite familiar with the insane levels of snow they can achieve, and also the awful driving, because it actually is a somewhat hilly town.
Yes,
as well. So if you're not,
if
you're not careful, you can end up sliding quite a ways down there. Last thing is, you mentioned .NET Performance. I don't know if you know this, but one of the people that led that team over on the Roslyn team, her name is Mei Chin Tsai. She now works on our team, and she leads all of our compute platform stuff. She's been on the team for a few years now, but when you mentioned the .NET Performance stuff, I know that was one of the things that she was driving over there on the Roslyn team before she came over. So anyway, we our lives intersect in many ways.
In Flagstaff, once when my parents first moved there, it's a very long time ago, of course, and it snowed like over 200 inches in 1 year. It's so much that they were printing T-shirts. I survived the winter of whatever it was. And because they really get hammered up there sometimes.
Sometimes you can't run the chairlifts because you have to dig them out. There's so much snow. So thanks for having me on. I thought I'd talk about stuff. It's been a year, I guess, since the last
a little bit over a year.
Over a year since last time you and I got together. We've been busy over on the Cosmos team. I mean, a lot of stuff has happened in the last year. One of the biggest was just last November at Ignite. We announced a new database API for Cosmos DB. That's our Azure Cosmos DB for Postgres. And it's not new in the sense of it's a brand new product or service offering. It actually was formerly the Postgres for Citus extension, but we decided we wanted to kind of make that part of the overall Cosmos brand. And the reason is because just like the other NoSQL APIs in Cosmos DB, it's actually a distributed database like ours are. So it's a scale-out database. Well, it's both, I guess, in a way. You can increase the size of the cluster, but you can also scale out tables within Postgres and scale out that way. So that was a change we made, and we made an announcement back in, I guess it was October. When was Ignite? October, I guess, November.
Yeah, I think it's around that time.
Something like that time. So that's very exciting. Great to have them as part of the overall Cosmos DB team. And you should expect lots of good stuff and viewers as well coming this next year and even beyond with that. So another thing.
Wait, before you move off of Postgres, can you explain really how that works really? Because, Postgres SQL against Cosmos DB, is that how it works?
It's its own service, right? It's basically native Postgres. And the way it works, so you have kind of the native Postgres in that engine and storage engine. You then have this other piece, which is a Postgres extension called Citus. And Citus is what provides that distributed database capabilities where you can create distributed tables, if you will. And the way you do this is you designate, it's similar to how Cosmos works in that you have a partition key property. You have a distribution column. And the values of that column are what distribute data into different distributed tables, if you will, right? So that's fundamentally how that service works with its sharding mechanism, if you will, in there, right? Okay. It's a compute and storage mechanism, just similar to how Cosmos works, right? So Cosmos being a distributed database, you have what we call partitions in there, and each of those partitions is itself like a little physical computer. In fact, it's a slice of a computer. So it's got its own compute, memory, IOPS, and then of course its own storage. And when a request comes in, that gets routed to a physical partition where your data sits, and then it either does a query or fetches data, or you're just reading and writing data, et cetera, right? And the idea with the scale out and the way it's different than, say, a scale up is with scale out, there's no upper limit, I guess, right? It's basically as much storage and compute as you've got available in a data center is what's potentially available there for your database, your applications with that. The other thing too is because the design itself is shallow with respect to compute to storage, it doesn't slow. You don't see things like latency increases or performance slowdown as you add additional storage to the database, right? Like everything is shallow with a database like this because it just scales out, and each of it has its own compute head. You just need to wait. You just route that data, that request, to wherever partition that sits in, and then the compute there processes the request and then sends back the result, right? So the nice thing is you get equivalent performance if your database is, say, a megabyte in size or a petabyte in size. It just doesn't matter. If it's well designed, the latency is exactly the same. Right. That. So where you get into problems is your design is not so good.
Yeah. And, we've talked about that before.
Right. And so you issue a request that has to hit every partition.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more partitions you have, the worse your performance. That by definition is not scalable, right? You are not, that's not a very, very scalable design. So
yeah.
Anyway, we did talk about that. I talk about that every day, David.
I was thinking while you were saying that we need to have you come back on and just talk about partition keys because anybody I was going to ask you this later, but anybody coming from a relational database world and then coming over to like a world like Cosmos DB, there's a huge change and a huge learning curve, if you ask me. And to me, one of the sticking points is the partition keys and exactly how those work. Right.
That's right. It is the fundamental truth for scalable design in a database like this is partition strategy, right? Like how do I want to distribute data to scale out such that I can have good performance for writes or good performance for reads, depending on if I'm read heavy or write heavy, or how do I solve scenarios where I need to have both? I need to be able to scale with writes and reads. Right? There's techniques to that as well. So it's not easy, but once you kind of understand, kind of internalize kind of that fundamental difference, it does become clear. It's just you're like you were saying, it's a shift in thinking for designing a database. And it's not something in a relational world you'd never know about this or care about it.
Right. And that's that's one thing I tell people if they haven't used a system like Cosmos DB or one of the other ones, is that you're basically going to have to throw most of everything out the window and relearn it, because it's a completely different system, basically.
It is.
There's no rows, there's no tables, it's and speaking of that, before we move on to the next subject, is from the information that you sent me, you upped the maximum limit for a JSON, a blob in Cosmos DB, right?
We did. That was we did a lot of work on our Mongo API this past year. One of them was increasing the maximum doc size to 16 megabytes, which is equivalent to what you would have for your native Mongo engine.
Because in the beginning it was like 1 or something, right?
It's
it was like 1 mega.
It's 2 megabytes is the size of docs, right? We did that because customers who were trying to migrate, in some cases would have not a lot of docs, but if you even had 1 and you were trying to migrate your data, it would fail the migration, right? It would just barf on that doc size and then it would stop, right? And so you'd have to go and look at it and say, okay, well, which docs are over 16 megs or over the 2 meg? And then you'd need to come up with a strategy for how you deal with that. I mean, you'd have to shred the doc basically into multiple docs, right? And that's, you're just starting adding complexity upon complexity upon complexity in there. And so one of the things we did was we designed a way for the Mongo API to be able to support up to 16 megabit doc size. That does not come, we are not releasing that for any other database API. For any
Mongo.
of the NoSQL APIs in Cosmos. The reason is the service fundamentally is not designed, but let me put this in 2 ways. One, it's an anti-pattern in a NoSQL database to design for documents that are really insanely large size. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, if you were doing high volume or even high concurrency operations over documents that size, that's pretty bad from a kind of a network perspective. You're shucking a lot of data back and forth over a wire to do updates on that document. So it doesn't make sense. The other thing too is the larger the document is, the more expensive. In fact, it grows in a nonlinear way, but the larger it is, the more expensive it becomes to serialize and deserialize the data itself as you're moving it in and out of a database. And that can have a huge strain on compute on client-side resources to be able to do that serialization, that deserialization. And it actually gets worse. You can actually even make that worse if you have very deep levels of nesting within a document. But even even if it's completely flat, serializing, deserializing 16 megabytes of data is expensive and slow. And those things are really at odds it's essentially an anti-pattern for a database like a NoSQL database, where what's primacy for a database like that is high performance, low latency. So designing a database where you were shucking database or documents that size is kind of an anti-pattern for that type of database in terms of design, document design, data modeling. So don't do it. The other thing too is if you were database. Who needs to look at 16 megabytes of data?
I know.
In one shot, right? I mean, that also from a modeling perspective, you want to model your data such that the user is getting the data they need when they need it.
Right.
I don't know of anybody that needs 16 megabytes of data right there in a single screen. Where
Yeah,
are
I
you
don't know
putting all that
either.
data? Right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
even in a relational world, shucking 16 megabytes of data is kind of a stupid idea. So
True.
anyway, there's for that and lots of other reasons. We're not ever going to make that available for SQL API or no SQL API or any of the other ones, just because it's just that's not something you want to do in terms of design. So just trying to put some guardrails up there for that.
Yeah, especially if you're worried about performance. Yeah, a 16 megabyte blob coming across, just one blob. I mean, they could be requesting many, right?
Yeah.
And that would horribly kill your performance.
By the way, even Mongo's docs even say don't do
it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's the same reasons you wouldn't do it in Cosmos apply to Mongo itself. They just had that as an upper limit, and so that's what it is. But we did lots of stuff around Mongo this year. The other stuff as well is we GA'd native Mongo RBAC. So Mongo has its own groups and users within there. So when you log in, you can pass it like a username, and then they have their own RBAC in there as well. So we released support for that. That also, so 16 meg docs came out in October last year. RBAC came out in October. Another thing we did was release support for retriable writes. This is another thing that we did. The idea, I mean, Mongo supports retriable writes. The other thing we did, the reason we did it was because it helps with data loading, right? Here's another kind of key difference between our Mongo API, our fully managed Mongo API service or API database service, and then Mongo, like say running on a VM, is when you were sending large amounts of requests to Mongo running on a VM, or actually this is any database running on a VM, the VMs will tend to queue up those results or queue up those requests, right? So you build up basically queue depth within there, and then it will, obviously the CPU will, go and process those in kind of the order it comes in. I mean, so you get this queue depth. What it looks like to a user is just increased latency, right, to the user. In a database like Cosmos, because it's resource governed, you don't build up queue depth. It essentially just says, hey, that's too many requests. I'm going to send a 429 back to you, right? That's the request limit, right? Too large in there. So we don't do that natively or normally. The retriable writes, actually, what it does is it actually builds that queue depth. So if you were sending large numbers of requests to Cosmos or to Mongo API, it'll basically just queue those up, and it'll queue them for like 60 seconds within there. And the idea here is, if you're doing rapid kind of data loading, which is typically where we saw this kind of thing creep up, this will help make that a little smoother process, actually a lot smoother, because you don't have to worry about being very, very cautious on hitting that rate limit, and then trying to find some way to do like some kind of load leveling so that you don't hit that. Now you can have more flexibility in there.
Yeah, that'll prevent people from doing sleeps in their code, right? Which is never a good idea.
So, right. I mean, it's the way things we would see is, I mean, you'd either use some kind of queue-based load level where you would put it into an event hub or some kind of queue, right? And then read off the queue. Maybe it's Kafka or something. It doesn't matter, whatever it is. And then you could basically rate limit off the queue in there. Now you got a better way of dealing with that than what we had before. Other stuff we did as well. We had release a preview for our Linux emulator with Mongo support. That came out back in June. Since then, we've had, in fact, I just saw there's a GitHub issue for one of our old emulator releases. We've gotten a lot of feedback for customers asking for M1 support. Currently, it only runs on Intel Metal CPUs. So we, if you're an M1 user, we hear you loud and clear. It's on we're gonna look at that for our upcoming semester. Planning for that will start in February, and then we run on like everybody else in Azure. We run on the 6-month semester kind of sprint, right? So October to March, and then April to October. So anyway, that's out now. And then the last one, this is probably the most important, is we have now a new private preview. We announced this on our blog, which I don't know if that thing came back or not. Let me refresh that. Nope, still waiting. We released a new private preview for a new Mongo offering. This is brand new, supports Mongo version 5 on there right out the gate. What is different about this offering versus everything else is it actually runs on a different compute engine than our Mongo API. It actually is vCore based, not RU based. Some other major differences with this is you don't have the 20 gigabyte shard limit within there. You now have shards that are, I don't know, like hundreds of gigabytes in size. Wow. Even huge unsharded collections in there. You can full support for distributed transactions. That's distributed transactions across a shard, across docs, across collections, across database. Better aggregation pipeline support because it's a vCore based. It's not like one of the stickier points with our Mongo API is because it's heavily resource governed. You couldn't run in extremely heavy ag pipeline queries, right? So these are kind of big, heavy, kind of OLAP-y queries. The reason is because of the resource governance, but also queries are time bound. You have a 5-second limit to when those can run, and then CPU will switch off and say, okay, I got to go handle something else. And it would just return whatever it had in there. You also had 40 megabyte response limits as well. So you couldn't do very heavy aggregation pipeline queries. And also all that is stuff that you can now get using this new vCore based model out in a limited preview. There's a link, there's a blog post on this. Maybe share that later. By the way, just for your viewers, our blog is down right now. So if you try to access it, just be patient. The team knows they're working on that. But if you go to our blog, you can find the announcement in there. Right now with the private preview, you have to have an NDA in place because it is a private preview. But if you sign up for it on our website, they'll check. And then if you got an NDA from your company, they'll sign you up right away. And if not, they'll help you get one in place with that. So anyway, I'm really excited about this. This is something we've been working on for quite some time within the Cosmos team. And I think I'm just really excited, I guess. I can't wait to see what customers do.
Well, hopefully your dev blog being down isn't because some guy did something funky with the database file, like brought down the FAA.
I don't. I don't know what database FAA is using. Our blog is using WordPress, or excuse me, it's a WordPress blog, so it's using MySQL as a backend. So,
well, since it was written over 30 years ago, I was saying, well, it's got to be written in Access.
What? You mean WordPress?
No, the FAA.
Oh, the FAA thing,
right? That stopped everything for a while that day, right? I made a joke on Twitter. It's probably Access, because Access had a tendency to corrupt easily, back in the day, and so it's going, it must be Access.
Hey, it could. Who knows? I mean, as old as that thing is, it could be an ancient DB2 database, or maybe Btrieve. Everybody remember that thing from the old ISAM days? That's an ancient database. Or Foxborough. There's another old one for you. So
especially since they were saying that the contractor did something wrong with a file. And I'm going, a file? Really? I mean, what kind of database you can just do that with? And that Access was the only one I thought of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ISAM databases were file based as well, right? So who knows?
Well,
hey, big data has now come back to now files are all hot again, right? Because that's all the big data OLAP types of databases are all basically file based, right? So
well, I'm after you and I talk, I have a slide coming up on my latest Twitter poll, and my latest Twitter poll was actually because of the FAA thing. You know, I'm asking people how old is the oldest program still in use at your company, right? And that's all based on what happened with the FAA, and literally the day after I did the poll, some guy at work was showing me the software they use to configure their system, and it's written in VB6, so it's over 20 years old, and they have no plans on changing it. Because when he showed it to me, the first thing I thought in my head was going, "Oh my God, that's ugly." Well, that's because it's VB6 was still when we had those ugly gray, programs back then, and thought it was funny.
Access and VB6. So just for background, I started my career in software development in Access.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
Yeah, I was what I guess you call them citizen developer now, or whatever you call it. I was basically an accountant, and a teammate of mine brought in a copy of Access 1.0. It was a beta copy actually on a couple of floppy disks, and said, "Hey, my husband just found this thing and says it's awesome. Thought you'd like it." So I checked it out. I installed it, and then over about a 4, 5, 6 month period, wrote a little Access database that did my job, which was great. I just do basically enter in data and then push a button, and then everything was done. And I was like, wow, that was great. That was actually more fun than doing my job. So I ended up quitting and starting a new career in software development.
A lot of people became Access experts, and because Access, for as much as we complain about it, was a really easy system to write, especially when it comes to the forms to enter the data and stuff like that. It was all built into one framework, right? You didn't have to, do the database part and then do the UI part. It was all part of one thing. And I, like a lot of things, to me, people just started using it for the wrong things, right? Yeah. Because Access was never supposed to be a high throughput, multi people using it kind of database. It was never like that, but people started doing it.
They started doing that. Yeah. That, and of course all kinds of hilarity ensues when you try to use it to access for like a client server N tier type of database background. Yeah. So, but that was my start. And then I went from there to VB3 at the time. VB6 didn't exist yet. And then VB5, VB6. And then I went and did FoxPro, Power Builder. I started getting into databases like Sybase at the time. SQL Server didn't exist. B-Tree, DB2. And then went into Java as well into the mid 90s and did some work on Unix, building Java apps on Unix, and then of course Java on Windows, and then it's on Microsystems, sued the pants off of Microsoft, and I stopped doing Java on Windows, and I did some PHP back then, and ASP, old classic ASP.
Yeah, me too.
Writing VB script to ever own the world, blow up the world more or less. And then that was, that was fun. And it all started with that little Access database that did my job. So, and I'm sure that's, I know for a lot of other folks as well, that's how they got their start. So,
I'm pretty sure the second class I ever taught at the university was about database, but I think we used Access, because it was so easy, especially if you're teaching, right? No one needs to install SQL Server or anything, they just use Access. And I just wonder why, now when you install Office, they install Access, and I don't understand why they do that, and I can't turn it off.
Oh, well, that's weird.
Yeah,
I didn't know they did that either.
The Office, the Office installer used to be where you could pick, what parts of Office you wanted to install, and one of them is Access.
Oh, but
now they don't let you do that anymore.
I believe the Outlook local storage engine is a little mini Access database. I don't know why they use that, because there's actually two flavors of the Access database engine. There's a red and blue, the Jet engine.
The Jet engine.
Yeah, right. So Microsoft Jet, that's the underlying database engine. And I know, at least it used to be, that Outlook used Access, or that Jet engine, for database, local Outlook storage. So But I don't know why you install full access to do that. That's kind of
Yeah,
bizarre.
I don't understand either. And it's not because I don't want it on my machines. I just don't want Microsoft encouraging people to use it. Right. 'Cause
No, you can use it. Just understand the guardrails of that. So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, to me, once they came out with what was it? Back in the early 2000s, SQL Lite or something like
Mhm.
that, where basically SQL for free, a lighter version of it, then I personally moved away from Access once that came out, because we do have a question. Mark, are you working with tools like is Elasticsearch as good as MongoDB?
Uh,
I'm not
Not
sure.
with Elasticsearch, but we do have integration with Azure Cognitive
Hmm.
Search within there. Actually, we just added. So we used to have support for Mongo within there. It was in preview and only through REST API. I know we released something recently. I can try to take a look while I'm kind of talking here. We did some enhancements to that for Mongo API in here. Let me see. I'm going to go into our docs here. Let's see if I
While
can
you're
find.
doing that, Simon said you're one of the most passionate people at Microsoft, including, and he includes Scott Hunter in that comment. So
Really?
yeah,
Well, that's really cool.
yeah,
That's nice to hear. Well, thanks, Simon. Hey, let me tell you, I love my job. Like I've been with
yeah.
this company for 23 something years. I've probably never had as much fun that I'm having now. I love it. Right. I get to talk to developers almost all day.
Yeah.
I get to, uh, if I need to write some code, I write a little bit of code if I'm trying to help someone or better understand something myself.
Mhm.
I get to work with really cool, passionate folks as well. We're still a relatively small team
Yeah.
within Azure. We run pretty lean,
Mhm.
and this is just a fun product. This is a fun service to work on. It's
Mhm.
not. It's still evolving, right?
Right.
Databases like this have only been around for just a little over a decade, and this
Right.
service itself has only been around since 2017,
Mhm.
so 7 years.
Mhm.
So it's very new, and the fun thing about that is that um, there's still a lot of innovation going on. There's still a lot of things to go and do. Right? This isn't like working, and I don't mean to disparage like people in Office, but
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot of innovation on word processing going on right now, at least that I know of.
I think there should be, but there's not
Maybe.
anything going on at Microsoft, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Actually, I do
That
think
I'm aware of.
where they are doing. I think is I think there's work going on in like applying AI to things like Office and word processing and stuff. So
Yeah.
I can't find it, but if you go and look, where is it? I know there's an integrating services thing in here. I can't find it. Yeah. Uh, just use your favorite search engine. I know we did some announcement around better integration with that, with Azure Cognitive Services, the text or the indexing engine there, search text. I just don't have a link for it available. So
That's fine. So we talked about throughput. Did we talk about new Azure functions
I
extension?
got more. Actually, I haven't talked about the
Oh,
throughput yet. Let me tell you
okay.
about that.
All right.
So this is, in addition to the Mongo stuff we did this year, we've been working on improvements to our throughput elasticity it's been going on for years. We've not only made it less expensive, and we continue to make it less expensive, but we also make it better, right? And that goes back to, we were talking earlier about partitioning and how hard that is.
Right.
The kinds of things we're working on here are meant to try and help make that decision, not make it easier, but kind of help you if you say make a bad decision, or in some ways make it easier. Like one of the things was burst capacity is one of these things. So the idea with burst capacity is unlike kind of auto scale, where if you have a burst up, you get charged for that maximum throughput in an hour. Burst capacity works at a smaller scale, but you don't get charged for it. So the idea is that you can accrue unused throughput over, say, like a 5-minute period, and then you can apply that all at once if you get like a sudden influx of requests there, right? So that's kind of the idea, is it can help you. You can go up to 3,000 RUs up to, or 30,000 RUs for 10 seconds. And there's so 33, you can get additional 3,000 RU a second for up to 10 seconds. So that's 30,000 RU. So, if you get that kind of spike of, request in there, that's there to help you and not cost anything more, basically, because it's just using kind of the using the unused throughput. Yeah. Another one, and this is really intended more for folks that have to go back or maybe need to redesign their partition strategy after, say, going into production. But one of the things we find is, if you have a poor partition key, you may end up with hot partitions within your container, where, when you provision throughput, like say you provision 30,000 RU, you're going to get roughly 3 physical partitions, and each of those partitions is going to get 10,000 RU. We allocate it evenly. So if you have a bad partition key design, let's just say you've got A, B, and C as your partition key values, and everybody's hitting A and nobody's hitting B and C, well, performance on A is going to be bad, and you're basically underutilizing B and C, so you're wasting money.
Right.
Idea with throughput redistribution is you can, through an API, reallocate throughput from partitions that are underutilized into a partition that is overutilized. And that can help you kind of smooth over issues where you're seeing 429s or rate limits on that physical partition there. Idea being here is it can help reduce cost, because the only way out of something like that is you have to then increase throughput even greater on that container,
right.
Which means you're paying even more to try and solve a problem for one partition. This allows you to keep the throughput at the same level, so you're not paying anymore, but just simply reallocate it to that partition that needs it.
But is that automatic, or do you have to do
not automatic? You have to. It requires
it
requires you to analyze the throughput utilization for those partitions, and then there's an API that tells you. I think it's through PowerShell right now, but it tells you, okay, allocate this amount over to here to increment that partition throughput.
Right.
And the nice thing without this is that at least this can give you some breathing room to allow you the time to go and analyze, like, okay, what is the right partition key for this container that would help make that even more even distributed in terms of requests.
Right.
And give you the time to be able to do that and not be pressured by having to pay more to run that container just for all of it, just because you got one partition that's not working properly. So so that's another one, is that redistribution. On the other side of that, another feature we've announced, and this is also in preview. All these are in preview right now. Is the ability to be able to merge partitions. And the scenario here is, I create a new container. I want to ingest a large amount of data. I want to do that quickly. So I'm going to provision a very high amount of throughput so that I can ingest that data as quickly as possible. Now, as you're aware, there's, for a physical partition, which is 50 gig in size, the amount of throughput that partition can take is, or can have from a throughput perspective, is 10,000 RU. So let's just say I've got, 200 gig in there, and I provision 100,000 RU. So 200 gig only needs 4 physical partitions for storage, because each one will hold 50 gig. But 100,000 RU will provision 10 physical partitions in there. So what'll happen is, as the data is ingested, it's going to get distributed into each of those 10 physical partitions. Now, once I'm done, I don't need 100,000 RU. Right? I can scale it back down. Right, to 40,000 RU. Right. Or I can even go less. In fact, that's the maximum amount for that. I can actually go far, far less than that. What happens is, when you scale down, what ends up happening is each of those physical partitions gets a much smaller amount of throughput. So if you had 10,000 RU on each of those, and you scaled it down to, say, 1,000 RU from 100,000 RU, now each of those physical partitions only has 100 RU to handle all of the data that sits within it.
Right.
This is a problem, because if you do anything like a query on data within that partition, you're probably going to get a 429. 100 RU is, it's okay. But if you have a pretty heavy size or a lot of requests hitting that partition at once, you're going to get rate limited because there's not enough throughput. There's not enough compute sitting on top of that data.
Right.
The idea then is, and what this is we call it throughput fragmentation, which is your data is fragmented and compute is fragmented over a large number of partitions, such that you don't have enough compute to operate on the data sitting within it.
Right. Right.
The solution there is, can you then merge that back together? And that's what the merge feature is all about. So how that works is, it's actually a long running background task. It's kind of like index rebuilds in Cosmos. And the way that works is you run a PowerShell script. It'll actually do a what if on there to see what's going to happen after you run the script or the merge operation. And it'll tell you, here's the number of physical partitions you're going to have after you're done with this thing. And then it'll actually, you can go and run it without what if, and it'll actually go and do the work in the background and then merge all that back down. So the nice thing is if you just have that 200 gig of data, it'll merge you back down to the 4 physical partitions. And then instead of 100 RU per physical partition, you'll now have 250 gig or 250 RU per physical partition, which is 2.5 times better than what you had on there. So anyway, that's the idea with merge in there. Is it's there to reduce that fragmentation that occurs when you were doing large scales, or if you say TTL a bunch of data off as well. That's another scenario as well with that. The last one. Oh, go ahead.
The one thing I was going to ask while you were talking about that, I was thinking because the one question I had thought of before this was about cost of Cosmos, because that's the that's the number one thing I hear from people is the cost. And so I was wondering, does Cosmos DB have any tools, in the background that you can use to kind of tell you, hey, you should look at this because it's costing too much, or, some kind of cost advisor? Because I know Azure's got a lot of those things. I just wonder if Cosmos has one.
There are some things we do have. We have using the Azure Advisor kind of toast that pop up in the portal there, and I think we show those in our Blade as well. We'll show you things like, hey, your indexing policy is not that awesome. You should maybe look at using this or changing these indexes. We are looking at another one right now that's a partition key advisor that is similar in that it analyzes your workload. It takes basically samples the telemetry for your applications that are running on there, and it'll suggest a better partition key. There are also quite extensive sets of graphs within our Azure Monitor, our Insights Blade within there that you can use to keep an eye on utilization for throughput and storage. We also have very good integration with Azure Monitor, where you can set thresholds and create alerts on things in there. There's also, and then log analytics queries too, so you can keep an eye on stuff. There's no magic bullet for this right now. We are working on trying to make that more intuitive and easier and better for customers. Right now, you kind of have to set some of that up yourself, or at least dig into the monitoring docs and samples in there to see what should you set up in there to keep an eye on your services with that, so know that you're monitoring. There's also quite a bit of. We have a huge section, a whole section on docs on how to optimize cost, whether it's from queries to throughput to everything within there. Very, very extensive set. It's a heavy read, but it's. I think it's worth people's time. They can actually learn quite a bit about the service by understanding how to optimize it within there. Right, you can get insights into how that service or how the service works.
Sure.
Last thing I want to touch on, I know we're getting close on time.
Yeah, we are.
Last one is I want to talk about on throughput is hierarchical partition keys. This is a super awesome feature. With partition keys now, you pick one property and that's it. And that value is basically becomes your value for the partition key.
Right.
Hierarchical partition keys is just like it described. It's a hierarchy. So you can define, say, let's say if you're a multi-tenant SaaS app, I can have like a customer ID, and then like a department ID and employee ID, and then use that as my hierarchy, such that, that provides kind of that hierarchy for partitioning that happens within there. Nice thing is that at every step of the way, if I provide one or more of those partition keys in that hierarchy, I can keep my queries and operations bounded, right? So if I have a query that spans all the employees, I can at least say, okay, here, send the company ID in there, and then that query is bounded by that number of partitions, or by department, or by employee in there, right? So that's a very interesting and good way. And really the scenario there is really about these multi-tenant SaaS applications, but you can really apply it in any scenario where you've got a natural hierarchy for data within there. Last thing also is we increased the storage size. This is in beta. No, actually two things. We increased the storage size for our serverless. It's in preview now. We'll go GA soon, but you can get serverless now up to 1 terabyte in storage within there. So that's cool, right? And cost savings as well. Another one too is we reduced the minimum throughput for autoscale. So right now your min throughput is 4,000 RU, which will scale down to 400. Now you can set that at 1,000 RU, and we will scale that down to 100 RU for a container. So even cheaper or even lower minimums when your container is not taking any requests at all. Other stuff, new Azure Functions extension. So the triggers and bindings within there. I've been waiting for years for this thing, right? So anybody that used change feed using the Azure Functions triggers within there knows that you have to deserialize using a document object because underneath the surface there, it's using our .NET V2 SDK. And so, now we've got a new one. It's using .NET 3 SDK. Immediate thing you're going to notice is that you can now deserialize into your own custom types, right? So your own POCOs within there. You don't have to deserialize into a document base class or whatever. You get all the other cool stuff as well within there as well. Manage identity authentication. So you can use system assigned identities or your user defined identities. And all the improved logging, everything you get out of the .NET V3 SDK, you get out of this now. So better logging, custom serialization. You can put user agent stamping, retry policies, all that great stuff. I mean, and it's faster too because it's using our V3.NET SDK.
Right. Cool.
Another thing as well, me and the team built some huge example. It's like a whole reference implementation on building AKS applications with AKS and Cosmos DB. We've got this up on our blog as well, but it provides basically kind of a full reference implementation on how to, and these show up as I can get them in 2 flavors. There's a full bicep version of this thing, or there's a bicep and ASO version, which you can use ASO to then manage your Cosmos resources using kube control within there, right? So Azure ASO is the Azure Service Operator. They have these custom resource types that basically define resources in Azure. And then once you have those kind of define or use those types, you can use kube control to do things like provision stuff, manage throughput, do whatever you want, basically through there. And there's support for NoSQL API and Mongo API within there. But you can use these templates to basically kind of get clone and deploy AKS with container registry. We have a little to-do app within there. Key Vault with secret store integration, log analytics, of course, with VNet and subnet integration using service endpoints in there. So you've got private access from, say, your client all the way through Kubernetes and your pods into that run inside the VNet and then talk to Cosmos. So those are there. And, the idea is try to make it easy for users that want to use AKS and Cosmos together. You can basically take this as kind of a starting point and then just deploy this and then customize from there, or just at least see how these services work together. Because the idea is we want to help reduce that friction for how to stitch these services together and show people how to provision and deploy them and manage them within Azure.
Yeah. I better let you go before Simon gets mad at me. Is
he going to get mad? No, we're fine.
It's like almost it's past midnight there now. So
he should be a night owl.
Well, he's young. Luckily, he's young. So it doesn't. I can't do that anymore. I can't stay up past 10:30 or 11.
No, same here. I'm an old man too, but I do get up at like 5 a.m. As well, which also helps.
I unfortunately do too. I wish I didn't do that, but yeah, I'm getting there too.
Actually, I don't do it because I'm old. I do it because it's the only way I can get any work done before people show up at the office. So,
yeah, that's true. It's a lot of people. You get a lot more work done when your coworkers aren't around. That's for sure.
That's right.
Well, I'm sad you're leaving Southern California. Make sure to reach out and we go hang out before you leave. Or when are you going back?
Sometime this summer. So yeah, we tried it. I like it down here. Obviously, I mean, I lived here for a decade before Microsoft hired me and moved me up. And when Microsoft did this whole hybrid work policy thing from COVID, I talked to my wife and I said, "What do you think? You want to try living in Southern California?" I said, I liked it. I lived there for a while." And she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we just sold the house, came down, bought a house here, and about a year in, she's like, "I don't like it down here."
Southern California is it's a tough place, and it's very different from other parts of the country. That's for sure.
Culturally, not the same as a Seattle area.
Not anything, not near as cultural as
people
Seattle
are different.
is.
Everything is different. Freeways. She just one thing. She just could not get used to the freeways. Like when we came down here, I probably wasn't even past Santa Clarita, and I was already going 80 miles an hour down the freeway. Right? She's like, that scares the hell out of me. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like grandma's going 80 miles an hour. You got to go as fast as everybody else. If grandma's going 80 miles an hour, you have to go 80 miles an hour. So,
well, what part of where do you live exactly?
I'm in Irvine, so Central Orange County.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's I've had a couple girlfriends up, in the like Leso Viejo area, and that's okay. But anything north of that to me is I don't want to deal with it, right? Because it doesn't matter what time of day it is, the traffic sucks, right? All the time, every day, right? And you can't get anywhere, and you spend so much time,
especially through South Orange County. There, once you get past like Lake Forest, it's just awful all the way down to Camp Pendleton, and then you get about 10 miles of niceness, and then once you get to North County, it's then awful all the way through to La Jolla into downtown. It's terrible.
Yeah, I won't even go to Disneyland, and I won't even drive to Disneyland anymore. I just take the train because it stops really close to the park, and so I take that now. Yeah,
that's true.
So because I avoid LA at all costs because of the traffic, right?
Well, I live south of LA, and I try to avoid LA as well. So
yeah. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm really glad you're back. If anybody wants Mark to come back on and explain something specific like RUs or anything like that, please reach out to me and let me know, and I'll have him back on the show, because I think, because like I was saying earlier, that, Cosmos DB and systems like it are very, very different from relational databases. And so, if you want to have Mark back on, let me know. And the last thing I want to ask you, are there any good resources, for people for transitioning from, the relational database world to the document database kind of world?
Boy, is there. Hold on a second. Can I show you something? I've got a little gist. Maybe you can throw it in the chat here or in a window.
Simon can do that. If you put it in private chat, Simon can.
Hold on a second. I'm going to put this in private chat right here. So I created this little gist that has, like, the key thing to knowing how to use this database and how to get started is understanding how to model and partition data, right? Like, you will never be successful unless you know how to model this data and also how to partition it.
Right.
You better take a screen cap of that, folks, because that's a really awful URL. I should have made a friendly link for that thing. But what this is this provides kind of a link to all the articles and then videos, and then also there's some Microsoft Learn Labs, and then there's a GitHub repo that I created some years ago that walks through how to migrate AdventureWorks database over to Cosmos.
Cool.
And I also have a talk that I've given on this at conferences over the years. And the idea here is the migrating that database actually teaches you the concepts you need to know in terms of how to model and partition data, so that you can go from, a relational model to a very highly scalable model. Oh, thanks, Simon.
Yeah. He shortened it for everybody.
Very short and much better. But that's absolutely key. If you cannot design a partition key strategy that can scale, your app will never be successful. It will always be slow and expensive. The promise for a database like this is infinite scale and very low latency, regardless of size. Right. But if you don't design with that as in mind and know the techniques, you will never achieve it. And that's that's where people get frustrated with that. I'll say one more thing too is this database, if you're building for the cloud, you're fundamentally building for kind of a distributed world.
Right.
And this database is really built for that type of environment.
Yes,
it's built
it is
to be distributed. It's distributed locally within a region because we have 4 replicas. And that's there for availability in case any one replica fails. But we're also distributed geographically. So if any region fails, you can also maintain availability for your data. So when you're building for the cloud, you need to build with failure in mind. And this database natively is designed to help do that. And that is why this database is a Ring 0 service, and a mass majority of services in Azure use Cosmos because we've solved the big problems for maintaining that availability and running data in a distributed services world. So
anyway.
Well,
cool. I better let you go. It was so great talking to you, and I hope to have you back on the show as soon as somebody wants to hear a specific subject. I definitely want to have you come back on, and of course, you're always invited to come back on if you have new stuff you want to talk about. You always have an open slot here. Just reach out and let me know.
Hey, anytime. I'm happy to come back and talk about anything and everything at all you want. And I'm hoping to come and visit all my friends down in North County before I leave sometime.
I hope you do. Yeah, we should hang out.
One of my favorite places in the world is just North County. I wanted to live there, but my wife said it's too far away from Orange County. So I'm like, all right.
North County is fine.
What ended up back in Seattle. Anyway, so.
And I live in Del Mar, so that's
right. So you'd be on one of my first stops there. So
yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot. You can hang out or go visit or go hang out with your kids. I hear them in the background. So
I'm gonna take them to the park.
But thanks so much for spending part of your Saturday with us, and I really appreciate it. And this was really enlightening, I think, not only to me but to a lot of other people too. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you, folks. It's great. We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Well, that was a really great and a lot of great information for Mark. Like, I'm going to have to go back and watch my own show to remember everything that Mark said. So, like I said, if you want to have Mark back on the show to talk about anything specific about Cosmos DB and how to set it up, especially when it deals with costs, because like I alluded to, that's the number one thing I hear from you all is why you don't use Cosmos DB, and it's the cost. And maybe the cost is bad because you haven't done your partition keys correctly. So let me know if you want to have Mark back on. Either, of course, email me or tweet me. I'll have him back on anytime you guys want. There's a program I wrote a number of years ago I want to get back into doing because I want to get back into using Cosmos DB. And the one thing I was thinking about, towards the end of that conversation with Mark is, if I were a CEO of a company or even the CTO of a company and we were doing something new, I would definitely use something like Cosmos DB because of all the great things Mark alluded to at the very end of all the things it solves that you can't really do with SQL Server or any relational database like that. So I hope if you haven't used Cosmos DB, I hope you check it out. I really like it. I need to learn a lot more, of course, but I hope you check it out. I think it's a great thing to use, especially like Mark said, for distributed global applications and things like that. So, all right, I have a new Twitter poll out there. I kind of said earlier why I did this, but so of all the programs you have at work right now, I don't care if they're applications or services or websites or whatever, what's the oldest one in existence right now that's still running? And like I said, one of the reasons I asked this was because of the meltdown with the FAA a week or two ago. And it was because of one database file that basically halted all flights in America for like half the day. And so I was wondering, how old is the apps out there? I know some companies are over 20 years. I said that, my company is the company I'm contracting with right now has an application that was written in VB6 over 20 years ago. And no plans, as far as I know, to rewrite it. So I'm curious, how long is the longest one? So there's the poll. That's the stats of this morning. I think this ends Monday. So I hope you go vote on that for me. Here's a geek humor for today. It doesn't work. Why? It works. Why? I don't know about you, but I've been a software engineer a long time, and it works. Why is something I've said to myself many, many times. And I've even told people, I don't want to release this because I don't understand why it's working. So geek humor there. Let's think about our friends in the Ukraine. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the year mark on this horrible war, and it doesn't seem any good things are happening right now, really, with that. So please keep them in your thoughts as they're fighting this horrible war against them for no real reason. And if there's any real way, I'm sorry, if there's any way you can help support them, either with money or your time or whatever, I hope you will support anything you can do with Ukraine to get over this thing. Because I can't believe it's almost a year and we're still talking about it every day on the news. So please keep them in your thoughts. Also, to keep in your thoughts are the kids that I raise money for every week on this show. And I donate money from one of my books to the Voice of Slum too. So these are pictures from when I visited the orphanage last year in October. And we brought them 5 computers and some other goodies and things like that. So I hope you will help me help the kids in India and support. There's multiple ways to support. You can go to that link there to my GoFundMe page, or you can just go to thevoiceofslum.org itself and just buy things for the kids there. They have ways for you to buy everything from personal products to school supplies and things like that for the kids. So I really hope that you'll help me help them, because it's a really worthy cause. And I'm very, very proud of all the work not only the founders are doing, but look at the kids. That kid that just was on the screen spoke better than I did. Multiple people told her that at the CSharpCorner conference. She speaks better than those of us who've been speaking forever. So it's a great organization. All right. You know what? I don't have any guests lined up. I'm having a really hard time finding guests right now. So I need your ideas. What guests do you want me to invite on the show? I'll invite anybody except for Scott Guthrie and Bill Gates, because that's just a waste of my time. They're never coming on the show. But anybody else, please email me, tweet at me, whatever. Let me know what guests you want to invite on the show, and I'll get them on the show. I have a couple in the works, but I don't have anything lined up right now. So the next show is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. So I'm sure I'll have somebody by then, but I need your input. Who do you want to hear from on this show? This, like I keep saying, this is your show. It's not mine. So let me know what you want. Also, we're still getting hammered by COVID and other things right now. I heard a couple of days ago, we're still losing 500 people a day in America from COVID. So please be careful. Please wear your mask if you need to. And in the meantime, I hope you will go donate blood at your local blood bank. I'm finally able to donate after 3 months tomorrow. So I'm actually going down tomorrow and spending 2 hours on the machine to donate platelets and plasma. And the reason I haven't been able to do it the last 3 months is because of my trip to India. So when I go to India, because of the malaria problem there, I get knocked out of donating for 3 months. And so it used to be a year. So I'm really glad they've shrunk it down to 3 months now. So I get to go back tomorrow. I'm so happy I'm able to help others by donating blood. And I hope you will too. And with that, I'm glad you all came on to the show. I hope you learned something. I certainly did learn something. And if you want to reach out to me, there's lots of ways to do it. Twitter, or you can email me at rockinthecodeworld@csharpcorner.com. And with that, I'll see you in 2 weeks.